Very good evening. You're watching the Super Saturday debate with me, Akanksha Swaroop. Now, in the ongoing showdown between Canada and India, today is the deadline for Canadian diplomats to leave India by midnight. Interestingly, Canada's Foreign Minister Mélanie Joly has said that the remaining Indian diplomats in the country are quote-unquote clearly on notice. This after Canada named the Indian High Commissioner Sanjay Kumar Verma as a person of interest in the killing of a Sikh separatist leader, Hardeep Singh Nijjar, designated as a terrorist by India. Ms. Joly has even compared India to Russia, which it claims has also resorted to transnational repression in Germany and the UK. Ms. Joly said that the government would not tolerate any diplomats who contravene the Vienna Convention or put the lives of Canadians at risk. On the other hand, India has shared information with the Canadian government on Sandeep Singh Sidhu, alias Sunny, who is a Khalistani terrorist. Sandeep Sidhu was in touch with the ISI and is also an employee of Canada Border Service Agency, or the CBSA. As per India's intel, Sandeep Sidhu is responsible for executing the assassination of Balwinder Singh Sandhu. Who was he? He was a Shaurya Chakra awardee for attempting to stop the Canadian border agents' cross-border smuggling of narcotics and weapons. It should be noted that Balwinder Singh Sandhu had also opposed Khalistan referendums being held in the United States and Canada by the Sikhs for justice. That brings us to the question on Canada that refers to diplomats as persons of concern, but gives a free run to India haters.
They're clearly on notice. So 6 of them have been expelled, including the High Commissioner in Ottawa.
Let me introduce our esteemed panelists today. I'm joined in by Dean Baxendale, who is a Canadian journalist, also joined in by Ambassador Deepak Vora, who's a former diplomat, Terry Miliuski, who's the author of Blood for Blood, 50 Years of the Global Khalistan Project, Madhav Nalapat, who's a geopolitical expert and director of Geopolitics and International Relations and UNESCO Peace Chair at Manipal University in India. Many thanks to you, gentlemen, for joining in. Dean, if I could begin with you, is India paying the price of following diplomatic channels when it comes to addressing its own transnational repression cases? In this case, primarily that of a Shaurya Chakra awardee, that to the killing of Mr. Sandhu.
Well, of course, this is a very, complicated back and forth. This escalated over the past week to obviously a level that neither country wants to find itself in. The transnational repression operations by various governments throughout the world, it has played out in Canada. And certainly, as we know, the indictment in the United States by the FBI, and it was through the sharing of that intelligence with the Canadian government that the Canadian government did try its diplomatic channels to get India to the table to try to resolve this from behind the scenes. And unfortunately, this is playing out full stream, where governments are taking it upon themselves.
Dean, what was the attempt made by, when you say that they attempted having negotiations via diplomatic channels? Because we all know that the RCMP, with every claim that has been made by the RCMP, is only providing scant evidence in public domain. Of course, India's External Affairs Ministry has clearly gone on record to say that not a shred of evidence has been provided so far.
Okay, listen. I think the diplomatic channels were open right from the outset. I think the fact that the Indian government didn't want to address perhaps their involvement directly in the planning or plotting of an extrajudicial murder on Canadian soil, that still has to be proven, of course. But I would suggest that the commissioner of the RCMP did not get up and do a press conference without having the information in hand. And I think we're close to seeing an indictment, or what we call as laying of the charges against individuals here in Canada.
Ambassador Vora, if I could bring you in to weigh in on what Dean has just said. Let's, in fact, begin with our focus on Mr. Sandhu's killing. You know, remember, he was a target of militancy. He, his wife, his brother, and his brother's wife had fought against militancy, and that's why he was awarded the Shaurya Chakra back in the year 1993. Having said that, now won't that tantamount to transnational repression on our own Indian soil? And what about India, you know, taking this forward via diplomatic channels? How is Canada reacting to that?
Thank you very much, ma'am. Always a pleasure to be with you on your channel. It's a great honor. You are the best. And of course, we have so many other colleagues, including Professor Madhav Nalapat, whom I admire greatly. His comments and his assessments are always spot on, and also our friend from Canada.
It's a pleasure to have you as well, Ambassador.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, this what you're talking about, this person who was killed in Canada, I have served in that region, and there is a very strong racist element. Look, this is some kind of fourth world issue. It doesn't impact us. I remember, ma'am, in the 1980s when I was posted in Washington, we used to keep telling them about Islamic terror. And again, we were told, oh, no, this is some kind of law and order problem for you guys, till 9/11 happened. And then they came running to us and saying, where's the file that you had given us? We've lost it. So we had to give them another file. I've seen this in the course of my career. May I just put it like this, that this is a Canadian challenge, this issue of terrorism, Sikh terrorism. There are a couple of hundred chaps there. It doesn't impact India. They're not my people. They are Canadian citizens. You should be dealing with them. Why would I want to eliminate them if you had put them in jail, even assuming that I want to eliminate them? I don't. That's not my style. That's your style, not mine. May I say something, ma'am? I've just seen a very good comment from a former Greek ambassador, colleague of mine. And what he says is that we need a true rules-based international order. The Canadian Prime Minister, please forgive me if I call him, as some people have dubbed him Dustbin Trudeau, but may I say the Canadian Prime Minister, he keeps talking of rules. We are a country of the rule of law and the law of rules and whatever. And then this Greek diplomat, a colleague of mine, has said, you can't have one set of rules for the West and another for the rest. That, I think, is a very powerful indictment. And may I simply conclude by saying that what we are doing is perfectly within our... During the farmers' protest 3 years ago in Bharat, the fellow from Canada was saying, oh, we'll stand with the right to protest and freedom of speech. We didn't interfere when the truckers were protesting in Canada. We didn't do anything like it. Then he starts screaming about money. There was a resolution, Professor Nalapat, you will remember, in the European Parliament last year about the ethnic violence in Manipur. 100 out of 100 European parliamentarians don't even know where Manipur is. So this kind of nonsense has to stop. Ma'am, may I simply say that by encouraging this kind of nonsense, what if we decided and said Quebec deserves to be free? How would the Canadians react to that, ma'am? I would be interested in knowing. And finally, may I just say, sir, for all of those, our friends in Canada, all those on the panel, may I simply quote someone I used to worship when I was a student in college, chap called, you probably heard his name, Bob Dylan. You better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone, for the times they are a-changing. The old order is rapidly fading, for the times they are a-changing. Please remember that.
Mr. Nalapat, let me, in fact, take this conversation back to the killing of Sandhu, because, you know, I think Mélanie Joly's comments have been extremely lopsided. She talks about transnational repression, forgetting that India has already presented a dossier, not to forget the fact that there are 26 extradition requests which are pending in the last few years, and the fact that there's a Canadian Border Services agent who is in question, who is most wanted by the NIA at the moment, and Canada chooses to remain a mute spectator.
Well, I'd like to say that the fact is transnational crime, terrorism is a global issue, and a terrorist anywhere is a threat everywhere. Now, I'd also like to point out that so far as Indian diplomats are concerned, their service rules are very clear that they should not engage in quote-unquote covert activity. And I have yet to meet, Ambassador Vora, while he was in service, will bear me out. I met a large number of Indian diplomats and officials, and they are very careful not to transgress those service rules. Diplomats in particular are told very clearly not to transgress those rules and go into the kind of covert operations that our High Commissioner, no less, and 5 other diplomats were accused of. I simply want to say that it's very unfortunate this is happening. India and Canada should be good friends and working closely together for security of the Indo-Pacific. But I think the Trudeau government has a lot of problems. For example, the Deputy Prime Minister, her grandfather has just been outed as a Nazi who basically ran a Nazi newspaper in occupied Ukraine. And that news has come out. It's incredible. A Nazi newspaper. And the point was that the Deputy Prime Minister knew this for about 2 decades, and she denied it flat out just about a year and a half ago. No. This is Russian disinformation. Well, you have seen, for example, the Hunter Biden laptop is not Russian disinformation. If the Russians print, for example, that Canada is a great country, I hope the Canadians won't say oh my God, this is Russian disinformation. I also want to point out, frankly, the Trudeau government in British Columbia, as I understand, has legalized the sale of cocaine. I can understand marijuana because it's impossible to basically stop it. But cocaine is a very hard drug.
Right.
And do you know that more than 6 to 7 people are dying every day in the single province of British Columbia as a result of cocaine overdoses? We don't see that.
No, but in fact, so much so in this case as well, in the killing of Sandhu also, the name that has been brought up of that CBSA agent, he is also accused of in fact, smuggling drugs and narcotics. So this couldn't be happening without shelter being given by the government in itself. When you look at the kind of drug cartels that are operating on Canadian soil. Dean Baxendale, if I could quickly bring you in, and my apologies to you, Terry, I'm going to in fact come to you, but Dean, I'd like you to weigh in on the double standards and the hypocrisy of the Trudeau government.
Well, as I wrote in my column a year ago when Trudeau first came to the House of Parliament and announced that he had credible intelligence on this issue, I called it out at that time for what I thought it was. It was a deflection from the fact that Justin Trudeau and the government had been weak on the transnational repression and the infiltration of the Chinese Communist Party inside Canada, and election interference, which has gone well beyond both the Liberal Party, Conservative Party, the NDP Party. And unfortunately, a lot of these operations are actually tied to organized crime, and the funding for transnational repression operations inside our country is linked to the opioid business, the fentanyl. But let me just correct the ambassador or the last guest that it's actually 6 or 7 dying from opioids and synthetic opioids, which are precursors that are shipped from China into Vancouver and are produced. Canada is exporting about 20% of the North American supply of fentanyl, and we are a transnational shipping point for that. So disinformation on that, we just need to clarify that.
All right.
Yes,
but thank you for calling a spade because it is the Canadian Federal Inquiry Committee which has gone on record to say that it is China which is the biggest threat to Canada, and not to forget the fact that you are going to be going into elections next year, October, and so perhaps Canada needs to be more aware so that it's able to conduct free and fair elections. Having said that, Terry, thank you so much for so patiently awaiting your turn. I think you're the best person to go to when we talk about the Trudeau's troubled relationship with India, and if I may have your views on whether this is the lowest point between Ottawa and New Delhi, especially when you compare it to the times of Pierre Trudeau after the nuclear testing in Pokhran in 1974.
That last question is easy. This is certainly the low point. I've not seen anything like this in relation to any other country. Kicking each other's diplomats out. This is an absolute diplomatic disaster between two democracies who should be friends, be working together. If I could just digress for a minute, I just want to point out in of the Canadian Deputy Prime Minister that she was the original source of the information about her grandfather editing a nasty newspaper. Any suggestion that she is guilty of any kind of taint of Nazism is absolute nonsense. I know her, and Canadians know that that's simply not true. Now, the reason that we are at this low point is because of Trudeau's demarche in the Parliament, of course, saying that he has got these credible allegations. I faulted Canada for many years for its feeble response to the Khalistan menace and for its feeble handling of the Air India bombing of 1985. It was a failure of the political class, all parties, not just the Liberals, and it was the failure of the justice system, the law enforcement system. It was an absolute disgrace. And I believe that India's anger was completely justified. It's always been completely justified, but Canada's not been doing enough to deal with that. That does not mean that Indians have the right to quietly go into Canada and murder people. That is going too far. And I'm afraid that I think Indian citizens are being gaslit by their government now.
Terry Miliuski, India has no right. Yes, I agree that India has no right to murder on Canadian soil, but where's the evidence? Where's the evidence?
Well, the evidence
there's no Indian politicians who standing on the floor of the House and in fact declaring or talking about these transnational repressions that are taking place on our own Indian soils, and that the number of extradition requests that remain unheard till date.
Fair enough.
I think India's response has been feeble on the other hand. We've not been able to address all those killings that have taken place on Indian soil.
So, but you asked me where is the evidence, and we've heard this day after day over the past week. Canada has produced not a shred of evidence. That, I'm afraid, is baloney, and Indian journalists should be very careful about repeating government propaganda. I'm careful about repeating my government's propaganda, and that is a false claim. Firstly, because we all know what the evidence is. Much of it is public in the FBI's indictment of Nikhil Gupta. It's all laid out there. You can read it for yourself. It's before the whole world, the evidence. Not patched and directed in New Delhi by a government employee, who, by the way, was arrested and has now been charged. Why was he given the boot if he didn't do anything wrong? If the Canadian charges are absurd. They can't be absurd and correct when the U.S. makes the same charges. And don't make this mistake. The Indian government says these are two completely separate cases. The U.S. case involving the plot against Panun and the Canadian case involving the murder.
No, but look at the way India has been approached by the United States, Terry.
People.
Look at the way India has been approached by the United States, and look at the way United States is conducting that entire investigation.
Correct.
If I could bring in Ambassador Vora, if I could bring you in on that comparison, today itself we were weighing in on the information that India has been consistently requesting for the extradition of David Coleman Headley, and let me not in fact compare that just with Vikas Yadav. But again, why are our extradition requests, whether with Canada or the United States, still pending? In fact, our last extradition request dates back to 2016. And this is somebody who's one of the perpetrators of the 26/11 attacks. Look at the way Israel is hunting down their killers. They've already almost avenged for the killings of October 7th.
You're so right, ma'am. This is purely standards that are not just double, but triple and quadruple that are totally unacceptable to us. You made this point about the Canadian border security official whom we want, because we have given evidence about his links with terrorism, with terrorists in Pakistan who were responsible for the killing of this brave Sikh person, I think it was in 2020, who opposed any kind of movement called Khalistan. So these double standards have to be exposed. They have to be abandoned. May I just say to our colleagues who are present here, sir, I serve as special advisor to 3 African governments. Let me just tell you, sir, a very large number of countries from the global south, and I say this with total responsibility, ma'am, have privately told us, well done, India, in standing up to these bullies from the West. As far as the United States is concerned, the case about the Indian official, ma'am, we don't allow it to impact our overall relationship. We handle it with maturity.
All right.
I'm afraid Canada has shown no maturity in dealing with
Let
this
me
case.
quickly have closing thoughts from Mr. Nalapat. Mr. Nalapat, do you also agree with various analysts who are saying that our current status as far as India-Canada ties are concerned is comparable with that of Pakistan?
Well, I don't think so, but I'd like to point out very clearly that Justin Trudeau's father, Pierre Trudeau, who, by the way, made a state visit to China way back in the 1970s,
Yes.
he refused to extradite a known terrorist to India on the grounds that India did not have the Queen of England as the head of state. I mean, that is incredible. What kind of logic? And this was Justin Trudeau's father who made that. As for this particular claim about the Miss Freed, the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, Chrystia Freeland, it was made by a newspaper called the Ottawa Citizen. I'm relying on that, and I presume Canadian journalists are straightforward. And the reports that I have read indicate that she did not reveal this, and it was outed when the fact was known to her for about 2 decades. And she revealed it only when it was impossible to hide. This is what I got from the Canadian media. So the Canadian media is wrong. I stand corrected.
Yes.
All right. Terry, I'd like to close in with your thoughts, because many are talking about how Canada is bedding with extremists just like Pakistan. But I think we still can salvage this bilateral relationship, because remember, we are also known to be allied democratic nations.
Yes, and we can and we will settle this. Maybe it's not going to be a pretty kind of settlement. Maybe a lot of it will be swept under the rug. Maybe Canada will have to swallow its pride to some extent. Maybe India will also have to swallow its pride to some extent, because the evidence is compelling and it has all been laid before the Indian government. And bear in mind, the trials are coming up. We have the RCMP now, not a political organization, not dancing to the government's tune. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police is saying, we've got 8 people now charged with various homicides, and 22 roughly involved in extortion. There will be trials. They will be transparent and open and public. And the evidence laid out in these trials is going to cause a nasty shock to those who think India is so hard done by those bullies in Canada. Yeah, right. We'll see.
We'll see, and perhaps await a more ironclad response, one that goes beyond the blistering language of the press releases as well. Many thanks to you, gentlemen. It was a pleasure to have this discussion with you. Thank you so much for joining in on the Super Saturday debate. And with that, it's a quick wrap from my end. Thank you so much for watching. News and updates continue on CNN News 18.